Today I want to talk about Bitcoin, how the government has fully embraced it, and what's ironic is that the Bitcoin people who they started as anti-government, anti-central control, have now started to fully embrace it, and you've got a bunch of billionaires and oligarchs that sort of control Bitcoin's community in a weird way, and I want to flag it. I want to flag the rise of Bitcoin strategic reserves, which are not strategies, and the weird direction this is going. It's just ironic because of what Bitcoin sort of started out as a way to get around the government, get around censorship, things like that. But now that you have government starting to accumulate this stuff, you've got the increase of rich and powerful people starting to accumulate this stuff. The question is, what is it doing anymore? Is it even trying to achieve the same goals, or is it just about the price going up? So I first started thinking about this when I saw Bitcoin 2025. That's the annual conference where a lot of these enthusiasts get together. And I really saw a huge uptick in the number of politicians who suddenly showed up saying they're true believers. They've always believed in the technology. They're all in on Bitcoin, and they say, look, it's going to the moon.
Where do you see Bitcoin in 2 years and in 5 years?
I think I sort of alluded to it earlier, but I think we're going to the moon, guys. I mean, it's going to be awesome. Just stay in, stay strong. We're like I said, we're in it from all these different ways, whether it's Truth Social, whether it's what we're doing with American Bitcoin on the mining side, World Liberty Financial, on the DeFi platform stuff. I mean, we're true believers.
That's right, guys. True believers. They've been true believers for months now. Okay, they're hardcore. Listen, with the obvious focus here of this whole conference was a lot, unfortunately, about price, numbers, to the moon. That's what a lot of this was centered around. It almost stretches the imagination to think of any other industry unironically saying we're going to the moon. Like, hey, where do you see computers in 5 years? To the moon? Where do you see AI? To the moon, bro. We're on the moon. You can't imagine. It doesn't make sense in any other context other than somehow crypto. This is sort of a normal thing to say. And if you thought that was the only example of that type of behavior, just wait until our next talk. Immediately, I was greeted by one of the Winklevoss twins, who you may remember as, making billions from Facebook. And they're on stage with David Sachs, who's the crypto czar of the government of the United States. That's who's up to answer some questions. And they sort of have to ask David an important question. This is the crypto czar. What do they ask?
Something about capital gains tax. No. I think it'd be great if the U.S. government started proactively acquiring Bitcoin.
What do you guys think about that?
That's about as big a rise as Fire Gary Gensler getting last summer.
So the question and the big applause break is, hey, can the government pump my bags? So it's kind of what it comes down to. I mean, do the people at the conference really care if the American government has a bunch of Bitcoin or not? No, they care because that will generate price movement in the upward direction. So it's just such a departure. It's such a strange thing to beg Daddy Warbucks. You've been saying this entire time you don't need them, you don't need the government, you hate the government. Now, the big applause break, the big thing that the two billionaire twins ask the crypto czar is, can you please buy my internet beans from me? The other strange implication I found weird about this whole thing is you have the Trump sons there as well. They have huge Bitcoin businesses now, a Bitcoin mining business. Then you have Trump Media Group raising $2.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. It's a little strange. The only thing I can relate it to is there's a famous example of Jimmy Carter. He put his peanut farm into a blind trust so he wouldn't enrich himself. But imagine if Jimmy Carter then established a strategic peanut reserve to then pump the price of his farm's peanuts. I mean, I'm not saying that's why the government established a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I'm saying that one effect of having first you buy a bunch of Bitcoin, right? And you get a bunch of Bitcoin businesses. and then you just have the government buy a bunch of Bitcoin. You're pumping your own bags with the taxpayer money. That's kind of weird. Now, I have to be clear that David Sachs maintained that the only way the government would buy Bitcoin for this Bitcoin reserve is if they did it in like a revenue neutral way where it wouldn't increase the debt. But I also have to be clear that you still are buying it. This revenue neutral way is just finding money that would have gone somewhere else, could have gone to anything. Like you could have bought NVIDIA stock in a revenue neutral way. You could have bought the S&P 500 in a revenue neutral way, just funnel it from one thing to another. So this whole thing is more about optics than it really is about the actual effect. It's just so people won't freak out thinking their taxpayer money is going to buy Bitcoin, even though that's sort of what's going on if you really pay attention.
So if we can convince Howard Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary, or Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury Secretary, to buy some, and they can figure out how to fund it, without a new tax or without adding to the debt, that maybe find the money from some other program that's not using it, then we could potentially acquire more Bitcoin.
Yeah, cool, I guess. Again, the question is like, why Bitcoin over any other commodity other than price go up? I guess that's what everyone's just thinking. Like, look at the price of Bitcoin. It's always gone up, so it's always going to go up forever. That's how these things work. And this is where I want to pivot to the Michael Saylor talk, where he sort of explicitly addresses this question of why Bitcoin over anything else. And he says, well, Bitcoin has outperformed the S&P 500.
Bitcoin. What gives you such strong conviction in that choice?
Well, Bitcoin's the only digital commodity, and if you're going to be a public company, then you need to be capitalized on a commodity. And Bitcoin is the first commodity in the history of the world that outperforms the S&P index on a consistent basis. So if you are a public company, it's a very simple choice. There's one best asset, and there is no second best asset. Right?
Woo, woo, woo. Hey, look, it's the guy selling a second best asset. If you don't know, Michael Saylor, who's famous for saying there is no second best asset, has gotten super rich from selling his company, Strategy, which uses Bitcoin and like wraps itself as sort of a Bitcoin vehicle, but with extra fees and other problems. So it's very strange to hear him say that, but there's just this hilarious irony that even if you swallow the idea that there is no second best asset, there's no other asset that's like Bitcoin, it will always outperform the S&P 500. Even if you believe that, it could continue to do that forever. You have to see the irony in Michael Saylor's whole shtick is selling his company and these convertible bonds as a way to get access to Bitcoin. When you could really argue there was a reason to do this back when it was harder to get access to Bitcoin. Now that there's a bunch of ETFs with this stuff, by the way, this is just a press announcement. They're constantly buying Bitcoin. That's Michael Saylor's whole thing. And you'll see that the price of Bitcoin and MicroStrategy, relatively, MicroStrategy has sort of blown up as people have used it to speculate on the price of Bitcoin. But what people don't know is that while Michael Saylor gets incredibly rich, all of these companies who've done this thing where like they make themselves like Bitcoin, but just a company that holds Bitcoin, like they're not doing much anymore. Michael Saylor's software business does very little compared to the amount of Bitcoin they're hoarding up, right? So they're really a Bitcoin wrapper. There's multiple companies trying to do this now to make themselves attractive in that way. The problem is you could just buy Bitcoin, or you could buy their thing where you have a bunch of CEOs getting paid, a bunch of workers getting paid, a bunch of dilution, other compensation, and you're just missing out. It's just a strange thing. So it's funny that they're like, there's no second best asset. Here's another people who did the Bitcoin strategic announced strategy. That's the whole thing with Trump media as well. It's just impossible to justify these things as anything but worse than the commodity itself if what you think is actually great about the thing is the commodity. It's like buying a company that hoards gold instead of just buying the gold yourself. Now you're taking fees because the guys who run it have to get paid, the logistics, they have to get paid. They're gonna take a spread on the acquisition fee. And then at the bottom line, when the company goes bankrupt, is that really your goal? The same question can be stated about Bitcoin as well. So all these, the irony is the people on stage at Bitcoin 2025 saying there's no such thing, no second best asset, they've gotten incredibly wealthy selling something other than the thing. It just goes to the lack of clarity and lack of a mission in the Bitcoin 2025 conference outside of price is the thing. It will outperform the S&P 500 as long as the government can keep buying it, as long as we can get new buyers in this thing. It's so strange and departed from the sort of original thing, which I guess, you know, the original buyers, I guess by definition, were sort of more in it for the technology, the philosophy of it. And it has just become a shell game of like, how much higher can we pump the price? Now, that being said, I want to be clear. Unlike some people who prognosticate on the imminent collapse of Bitcoin to $0, I'm not going to do that. I'm not even going to tell you that the price isn't going to go up. I don't know what the price is going to do. In fact, the government might be buying Bitcoin. I don't know, right? I don't know what you should do with your money. I know you shouldn't give it to these guys, right? Anybody wearing an orange hat with a company, beware. I also know that we're not in the first inning. This is something that people in crypto like to say is like, we're literally so early. The government's talking about Bitcoin. The president's buying Bitcoin. We're not, I don't know if we're in the last inning, but we're not in the first inning.
We often talk about baseball games as being sort of the metric for how early things are, and we're literally in the first inning. And let me tell you, this game's going to overtime. So,
look at the audience. This game's going to overtime. Listen, do you guys actually, does anybody believe this stuff? I don't know if he even believes it, or is that just something the company, you have to say as a guy with a company attached to crypto. But what would it take to get in the second inning? Okay, if the president buying Bitcoin didn't get you in the second inning, what will? This is such a stupid comment on so many levels. You can actually look at the market cap of all of the world's assets and you can see gold's number 1. Bitcoin is number 6. It's only behind by a factor of 10, which if it keeps improving at the current rate, like how much higher do you guys think this stuff can go? It's already worth more than Google, Silver, Vanguard, Meta, and only trailing behind some of the most valuable companies mankind has ever created. And gold itself. I mean, it's just so insane to be like, yeah, we're in the first inning. You're definitely not. And what's funny about this whole exchange is even David Sachs seems to realize that it's kind of a stupid analogy. So he says, you know, I don't really want to think about this in terms of price or something like this. I want to measure this in terms of innovation, but then immediately gives a nod, which is again about the price.
You know, I don't want to measure, you know, what we accomplish exactly through price levels. I guess I want to measure it through innovation levels, but I will say that I did notice that Bitcoin just hit a new all-time high the other day, and that was great to see.
yeah.
Pause for applause. Like, come on, man. This is not an anti-Bitcoin video. This is a, hey, grifters are invading you guys, and it's all about like the businesses the guys on stage own that are going to benefit from the government, different people getting involved, and just hyping this forever, right? The people on stage, almost all of them, have Bitcoin investments somewhere. I think David Sachs may be the only person who says he divested from all his crypto, but the Winklevoss twins, Michael Saylor, the Trumps, like all of these guys will hugely be benefited by the price going up forever and your taxpayer money being spent to pump prices. When, to be clear, that was never the point of crypto in the first place, is so governments could hoard it. So it's all nonsensical and antithetical to the original mission of this stuff in the first place, which I think is what makes it so incoherent and fascinating to watch. Just bizarre the way it's become sort of cultish. And look, I don't even blame the OG crypto guys for this. I think a lot of times they probably feel their own movement has been co-opted, as most things do when you have kind of crazy price runs like this. People just become obsessed with the price. But it's just a very strange thing, and I want to warn you guys against these announcements of these Bitcoin reserves. Oh, Tesla, Clurl, Rumble, everybody's doing a Bitcoin reserve because it seems cool. Guys, it's not a strategy, right? To just say price go up, right? You have to have an idea of what you're going to do with it. It's not clear what these companies are. There's ways to hedge for inflation. Even the people who are like, we're just hedging for inflation. There are ways to do that aren't sexy. You could buy some tips, okay? Look it up. They're not going to do that because there's no headline in it, right? They're selling you something, and you have to be aware of this. Anyways, I just wanted to talk about that because I thought this speech was just insane to be like, hey, could you buy my Bitcoin, please? Please, Dad? Please, government, the guys we fought against forever, please, can you buy my please buy my Bitcoin? Weird and cringe. And I think that's not an indictment of everyone who owns Bitcoin, but certainly the people who are, applauding as Michael Saylor, the guy selling you the second best asset, is telling you there's only one best asset. Guys, it's a sales pitch. That's all I'm going to say.